Hello. 1 year ago I bought myself a digital mirrorless camera, and I was just starting to get into digital photography on a more advanced level, and I enjoyed it so much I actually bought myself a DSLR as well, and I love them both. I watched plenty of videos and read lots of articles about how to get started, and it took me a long time to pick up what I needed, so I've decided to make this video to help someone out there who might be in the same position that I was last year. So hopefully some of my tips will help you set up your camera, try and get the best out of it to start with, and give you a quick start launch to get yourself well underway, and hopefully it will help you. Okay, first up I'll tell you what I'm working with. This is the Nikon D7100, and I have a 18 to 250 Sigma lens, sort of an all-purpose lens. Does a great job, I can't really fault it, and has a little macro function as well. First thing to do, of course, would be make sure your lens is clean and your viewfinder is clean, and you adjust your little diopter if you normally wear glasses to suit your vision. When you're looking through there, you'll get a sharper view. Okay, currently I'm in auto mode. Most people will tell you get out of it. It's no good. You're leaving the camera have total control. But you'll find there's circumstances where it is great. If you hand it to someone else to take a photo of you and your family, or if something happens really quickly and you just might, if you're lucky, you'll get a shot, you can just flick your camera on, point and shoot, and you may have a chance of getting it. If you've got it left in one of the other modes, you've left it in your shooting mode from the night before and all your settings are way out, you're going to miss that shot. So yeah, don't be scared of auto mode. It has its uses. The reason you bought a great camera was to get out of that mode so you take control and you will take better pictures. But always remember, you can go back to there or just leave it there when you finish at the end of your shooting session or the day. It's caught me out once or twice. I found it's good. Modern cameras now are so high tech that the shots they'll take in auto mode compared to 10 years ago are just awesome. So many professionals will just howl you down, tell you to get out of it and never use it, but it has its place. That's why it's there. Next, you'll want to find your autofocus button. It just happens to be here on the D7100. It'll be different for every camera. You may have to look up your manual to find that. Just hold that down, and you want to change it to AFS. AFACS, single point shooting. Now the reason you want single point shooting, as soon as you change into any other mode, you are letting the camera make the decision. Whereas if you keep it on single point, you are constantly making that decision where you want the focus point to be. I find when you're starting out, you are more in control and you have more of an idea of what you're doing. From watching a lot of other professionals and tutorials, a lot of the professionals like to use it in that mode. So get used to it, use it a lot, as much as you can, and you'll get an idea of the best focusing spot for your camera and lens. Next, we're going to change to Aperture mode. Turn your little mode dial to A or AV on Canons. I'll explain why a little bit later on. The next setting is your ISO button. That's the sensitivity of your camera's sensor. You need to find your ISO button and switch it across to auto. You have ISO auto from there to there. So get your ISO set in auto. Your white balance, WB. You also want your white balance in auto. Also make sure your lens is in autofocus, and also if you have optical stabilization or image stabilization or vibration control, that you've got that switched on as well. That's going to help compensate for any vibration or shake that you have in your hands. Even though you don't think, if you have extremely steady hands, you still get that little bit of shake. So that's great to have on if your lens has it. Don't worry if it doesn't. Just try and hold it as steady as you can. There's many different methods of holding your camera steady. Look them up on YouTube. There's plenty of different tutorials on how to hold it. Right, next we have our metering button. It's the metering button there. And when I hold the metering button down, I can change my metering. Spot metering, center weighted, and matrix metering. That's the one you want when you're starting out. It takes into account everything, all the light in the picture, and compensates perhaps for any bright spots or dark spots, and there's every chance you'll get the right exposure with matrix metering on. I think Canon call it something else, I'm not sure, but that's what it looks like. It's you don't want the spot metering or center weighted, you want the matrix when you're starting out. You'll get to that later on once you've taken a lot of shots, and you'll want to know what it means and how it can help you. But when you're starting off, just set it on matrix, leave it until you've taken a few hundred shots, and then you can start playing with your different options. Okay, so we're pretty much set up to start with. Aperture mode, auto ISO, auto white balance, matrix metering. Basically, you are now in control of your focus point. You have one single focus point, and you're in control of your aperture value. The aperture value is the opening and closing of your lens. Your lens will open as wide as it can get, and that's the lowest number on your aperture count. This lens has 3.5 is its widest aperture, and the smallest aperture on the lens is 6.3, but it'll close down even smaller to 22 internally when you change your aperture value here. I will explain that a bit more in a moment. Okay, so here's my camera, and here is my subject. When we point our focus point directly into our subject, if it's a person, you want to try and direct it straight into your subject's eye. So you half press your shutter button, locks it onto your subject's eye. If you have your aperture at its widest, which is the lowest number, 3.5 on my Nikon, this is my OMD, which is also 3.5, you've locked your focus onto your subject's eye, if it's a person, obviously. Now, at 3.5, your focus area is 1/3 in front of your subject, and 1/3 in front of your subject, and 2/3 behind your subject. So this much will be in focus. Okay? So what happens when you close up your aperture, that is the higher number, all the way up to f22, that area that is in focus becomes larger and larger. So your 1/3 becomes larger and your 2/3 becomes larger. Now if you have a second person in the background, or second or third row of people, like for example a school photo, you need a wider aperture to capture them in focus, otherwise they will be blurred. Now the other trick to aperture is the closer your camera is, we move our camera in, the shallower your depth of field is. That area that's in focus is called depth of field. So the further away your camera is, the wider the depth of field you have. So how close you are with your camera affects, and also your aperture value within your camera has an effect. So the closer you can get to your subject, the shallower depth of field you have, and the lowest number you have on your lens, 3.5 on this particular lens, is the shallower depth of field you have. Now all this area back here in your picture is going to be blurred and out of focus. Now that is what you want, because when you look at your photo, your eyes are initially drawn straight to the sharpest point. So all this background that's out of focus and blurry is not noticed straight away. Your eye is immediately drawn to your subject. So let's say, for example, it's a landscape photo and we do want everything in focus. We want all the background in focus as well. Well, we close down our aperture. We want the smaller the hole, so we up the value to f16, f11 or up to f22. Then you will get more in focus. So as your aperture value goes up, you get more in focus. The other thing you need to be wary of with aperture, if you have a very wide aperture, f2.8, f1.8, f1.4, you have to be very careful with your focus. As you get closer to your subject, you keep that focus point in the eye, but it gets to the point. If you've got a very wide aperture and a very narrow focus point, you can get their eye perfectly in focus, but their ears and their hair and other parts of their face will be out of focus. So you just be wary of that with your shots. If you have a more expensive lens with the f2.8 aperture value, one of the faster lenses, you may miss some of the head being in focus if you are too close and you've got it set wide open. Okay, so we're all set to go. We've got our white balance auto, single point autofocus, ISO on auto, aperture. We're ready to start shooting. Now we find our subject, line them up in the middle of your frame, half press your shutter button until you hear it lock focus. It'll give a beep. Then recompose your photo, move your camera where you want that subject in your frame. You might want to look up the rule of thirds. There's different articles and videos regarding the rule of thirds. Rules are meant to be broken, but there is a reason that they have a rule of thirds, and it does make sense, and it can be the difference between a great looking photo and a photo that's just looks like a snapshot that hasn't been thought. The process of where to put your subject in the frame just doesn't seem right. So yeah, try and stick with the rule of thirds when you're starting out, and stick with your aperture value setting and take hundreds of shots like this, different subjects, different aperture values, open it up. So you want shallow depth of field, and then up your aperture value, f11, 16, 22, get some much wider depth of field. And because you're in aperture value, your shutter speed is selected automatically by the camera. You may run into problems in low light, but your auto ISO hopefully will take care of that. One fix for low light problems is to buy a faster lens with a wider aperture. People say just work with what you got when you're starting out, but I find if you purchase an expensive wide lens, you're going to be more inclined to make the effort to use it, and you will see results, and you'll be able to take nice sharp shots inside without the blur or the grain that the high ISO tends to put in your photos. So yeah, I don't really subscribe to use what you've got. Most people who suggest that don't go buying expensive equipment and fast lenses, most of them have expensive equipment and fast lenses. So I would, if you can afford it, then try and get yourself a decent lens. Having said that, this is a cheaper lens which I really can't fault except in low light, so yeah, that sort of goes against what I've just told you, but that's just my opinion. So look, have a go with it with those settings, take heaps of photos and come back, and hopefully I'll have another video set up for the next step of the process where we can go into shutter priority or manual mode, where we can start adjusting the ISO and the shutter speed ourselves, and I'll explain how the light meter works in your camera as well. So good luck, and get out there and start shooting, and leave me some comments, and if this helped you at all, give me a bit of encouragement and hit the like button, because then I'll know someone's watching and may have helped them, and I'll be more inclined to make another video. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and happy shooting.